I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over, and we are here to celebrate 30 years of the Women's Prize for Fiction, which finally, we've been, Jenny and I were talking about this. This has been a couple of years in the planning, and we really have been trying to do this, and now we're finally doing it. And A.M. Holmes and Tayari Jones, two of my favorite writers, I have been reading both of you for quite a minute, which I'm delighted by. But also both winners of the Women's Prize in, let's see if I get this right, 2011 and 2012, 2013? It's been a minute.
2019.
19? Oh, all right, sorry, my sense of time is squirrely. Barbara Kingsolver has won the Women's Prize, and Ann Patchett has won the Women's Prize, and Margaret Atwood has won the Women's Prize. Okay, so last year, nonfiction gets added to the mix. And I have to say, I'm always really excited to see both the long list and the short list for the Women's Prize. Poured Over tends to have quite a lot of overlap with your judges and what you're trying to do. And one of the things we're going to talk about today on the show is building community. Because we have this amazing community through the Women's Prize. And there is a sense of discovery that comes with this prize. And I'm always delighted when y'all pick an American, because I'm kind of like, oh, it did translate. Mm-hmm. And if I think about American literature, you two are at the top of my list as a reader because of the way you approach who we are and what we do and why we do it. And since it's been a minute since both books came out, I'd love to know how each of these books started for you.
A.M.?
Let me try to remember. Funny enough, I was thinking, I have to look at the cover and remember what I'm talking about. If I remember correctly, this book started as a short story that Zadie Smith asked me to write for a benefit anthology.
Okay.
And it was supposed to be with strong characters, so I was interested in hostile brothers and competition among brothers. And I was actually thinking about John Cheever's relationship to his brother, Fred. And then I finished the story, but then the thing kept going, and I was like, what are you doing? And I was like, I don't know. And sometimes I won't talk to myself. I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, looks like you've got some more pages there. And I was sort of like, don't talk to me. And then it turned into a novel, which is something that philosophically I'm opposed to. Short stories do not become novels.
We're going to come back to that, because I don't disagree, but I have a question. But Thierry, you and I have talked about American fiction before, American Marriage before, sorry. And if I remember correctly, 4 drafts?
Yeah, when I was trying to write An American Marriage, I knew that I wanted to write something and engage the question of incarceration and the way incarceration affects society. But I felt like I had a problem, but not a story. I felt like, they say if a novel is to be any good, it's going to be about people and their problems. And I was writing about problems and their people.
Right.
So once I decided that I could write it about a young couple separated by a wrongful conviction, then the next question is, well, whose point of view?
Right.
Whose story is this? And so I rewrote the whole novel from beginning to end from the point of view of each of the main characters. Because I really, at the time, I thought it was only one person's story.
It was going to be Celestial's, right?
It was going to be her story, and everyone was saying, well, what about her husband? What's going on with him? He's in jail. What's happening in his life? And I felt like, and I'm sure I know a lot of men writers, and I don't believe they have ever been told to rewrite their novel from the point of view of the wife. Has never happened.
Bookseller agrees.
Yeah. So I was just resisting. I was just like, no.
Right.
But then I decided to go ahead and give it a shot, because one thing that writers have that say painters don't, if a painter revises her canvas, once she touches that paint to that canvas, she can never have the original back. But as a writer, you can always have that draft. So the only thing that stops you from taking advice is your pride. So I decided I was going to try to write it from his point of view, too.
Which I'm really glad you did. There's also an epistolary section that sets up the rest of the book so nicely. There's a sense of intimacy there that you wouldn't have, I think, when you're cutting back and forth in time, right? Like, it's easy to get a little lost in the weeds, and yet here's this section where it's really clear who Roy and Celestial are and what they mean to each other and what's broken. And I'm just wondering, when did that come into the final draft? When did that come into the book?
Well, I'm an epistolary person.
I know you are.
I've written letters to you.
Yes, I know, and I have answered many of
Yes,
them. Not
that
all
is
of
true.
them,
Well,
but many of them.
no one can answer all my letters, but I've always wanted to write an epistolary novel, but you cannot write a modern novel in letters and have anyone believe you. Because if you write letters like I do, you know people do not write you back. So the only time when letter writing is believable in the modern moment is when one person is incarcerated. Incarcerated people write a lot of letters, and the letters are so meaningful and so intense. So I always knew that I wanted to include that part.
Okay. And A.M., I remember lots of emails from Harry. Harry's finding his way in the world with email. It's not quite the same thing, but
No.
neither novel has a lot of cell phones. Neither novel has a lot of Google searches, and it feels, in a lot of ways, to me at least, it makes it much more timeless. Both of the stories much more timeless. I feel like technology can date us, and I do feel like Harry is, unlike a lot of characters I've met in modern fiction. I like him quite a lot.
Yeah.
I really am very attached to Harry Silver, who is a scholar of Richard Nixon, which I still find hysterical. But he's a mess of a human. He's an absolute mess of a human.
Yeah.
And how did Harry come about?
That's a good question. I don't know. I met him somewhere. No, I think when I was thinking about these two brothers, I was thinking about the other brother who is, this big TV executive who's really kind of out of control and so on. And then Harry is a professor of Nixon studies who gets fired because history is more future forward these days at his university, which to me I still have not recovered from. And he actually in some ways came out of white noise, I think, a little bit. He's left over from a Don DeLillo. But in the beginning, too, Harry was hard to write. And I kept thinking, why is this guy so hard to write? And I realized I'm writing about a man who doesn't know himself.
Right.
And the story for Harry is really a man, like a middle-aged man coming to know himself, almost a coming-of-age story late in life. So, and then he became so much more fun and interesting and open to things, which was, that's
Harry
the best
surprised
part.
me. He kept
too.
surprising me, and I was just like, wait a minute. He's actually, wait, what? He's actually showing up for his niece and his nephew, and he's actually trying to be a stand-up dude as he dates. It was really interesting to me that he was capable of evolving. I mean, Harry could have been a punchline.
Totally, and there was a difficult sort of situation where I thought Harry and a lot of contemporary literature, it goes downhill.
Right.
And I'm convinced that critics love things that have like a sad ending because they're sad. And I got in trouble, in fact, for this because it had a sort of optimistic ending. And it was like, oh, you've gone soft. And I thought, you have no idea how much harder it is to sort of round a curve and think, what could happen if things weren't always awful? Right. And that was really a big thing also for Harry personally, who's, we're still in close touch. But the idea of what would happen if it wasn't all downhill, what would happen if he actually got his footing, what would happen if he actually grew up a little bit, and trying to also find a spot to end the book that was a sort of a safe place to leave them. And it's one of the few books I've ever written. Two things happened. One, my editor at the time, Paul Slovak, said, there's no page breaks or chapters in this. It's all like one chapter, 700 pages or something. And I was like, oh. Because I'd written it with the compression of a short story. And I said, we can just put like spaces in. Because I thought, chapters have shape. You have to do that. You can't go back and chapterize something. So I said, we can put like bathroom breaks just along the way. And then the other weird thing was Paul was like, and you need to write a little more. And I was like, I do? Because at some point I had kind of sort of compressed and cheated the ending a little. So I was like, okay. I've never had an editor say, could you please write more?
And, I was thinking about this optimistic ending. Yeah. The reason also that they're harder is just like in real life. It's so hard to figure things out. Because I always try to give my characters an optimistic finish, because one of my big fears is I would hate for someone who is experiencing whatever I'm writing about to read my book and feel worse about their lives than they did before they started.
Right.
So I try to, because if I cannot, in the space of my imagination, my limitless imagination, if I cannot figure out a way forward, what hope is there for real people? But I was stuck at the end of An American Marriage for about 6 to 8 months because I could not figure out an untragic ending.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I think of both of these books as stories of second chances, and it has to be handled so delicately, because otherwise we could just end up sitting in a corner where it's kind of predictable and maybe borderline mawkish. And I think of both of you writers as writers who push the envelope with character, with dialogue, with story, and then we get these sort of American portraits that stick and feel very timeless.
I feel like when you're writing it, you don't know if it's going to be timeless or not. I mean, I often feel like I feel like I'm just trying to survive to the end. I'm just trying to get to the finish line. Because the thing about a novel is that 3/4 of a novel, 7/8 of a novel, 9/11 of a novel is the same as no novel at all.
Wait, what?
It's the same. If you don't finish it, you can't,
okay.
like for example, let's say you're a poet and you're working on your poetry collection. You can take out those individual poems, you can read them, you can do this with them. It's nothing you can do with a piece of a novel.
Right.
So you have to just pray that the story will stay alive until the end. And you can't be worrying about, is this timeless? Is it this? You just say, is it done?
Okay. Is it character that gets you to the finish line?
It's interesting because this one, I had a couple things happening. One, it was when I was writing it, it was not that there's ever a great time in publishing lately, but it was a very bad time in publishing. And I sort of thought all bets are off. So I'm gonna go funny. I'm gonna write the book that I would want to read. Yeah. And because it started as a short story and someone's murdered like on 20 pages in, that's not really where you start a book. That's usually where you end. And I've done that before. So it's sort of like, then you have to kind of, what I would call kitchen sink it. And you have to like, well, what else can I bring? And you just, every other kind of horror and trauma and nutty thing. And I went on all these wild rides. And the cool thing in a novel is you can digress. So you could go on these things where all of a sudden Harry's brother is, in some weird prison program where there's government cheese and refrigerators in the woods or whatever. And they go and they have a bar mitzvah in South Africa and, just strange things that don't happen too often in reality. And it was fun. So I also thought, I'm just going to make this the wild ride that I want to go on right now. And that's that. I have not done that before.
Really? You have a wild imagination, though. Your imagination, like I teach you toward the end of the term when the students are just out of it. They don't want to come to class anymore. And I'm like, let's read this short story. You know that short story? What's it? Adults Alone, I think is the name of it.
The people smoking crack in their house?
These people, their kids are away, and this couple, they are so alienated from each other that when their kids go away, they have no choice but they start smoking crack.
Well, and when I wrote that story, my agent at the time called me, and he's like, this is a long, long time. He's like, does it have to be crack? Can't they just smoke pot? And I'm like, no, that's the point. They're like in the suburbs, and it needs to be crack. That's what I teach. So with my students, I think I can't teach them how to write because you can't teach anyone how to write. But I look at them and I think mostly they're not going to be writers. They're going to be doctors or economists or nuclear physicists. So I think they need to be able to invent something that doesn't exist. And that's all I'm teaching is I'm teaching people how to make up stuff that has not happened yet. Because if you can't invent a future, it's like the same thing with the ending of a book. We're stuck.
Right. The poet Sarah Kay says she teaches poetry not to create an army of poets, but to teach people to sit with their insecurities and their big emotions. And I'm like, more of that, please.
Yeah.
I would much rather see a lot of that through poetry than what we might or might not be handling at the
Well,
moment.
and it's scary for people. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's the thing too, is teaching people to tolerate sort of intellectual
Mm-hmm.
risk or psychological risk. And the truth is that's also emotional and human risk.
Right.
And learning to find language for those experiences. So I think whether or not you're teaching people how to write, you're teaching people, as I used to say, what Grace Paley would do. She taught me how to be a person.
How to think.
That was
Yeah.
harder.
Honestly, learning how to write teaches
Yeah.
you how to think.
Yeah.
And so when I hear about people using Chat GPT to write their text, I'm like, you're missing out on the fun. Like, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you want to figure out, especially with something as short as a text, like you really kind of have to get to it. And it's like, what do you actually want to do? Like, although I occasionally still have punctuation in my texts, I will totally own that.
Well, I tell my students that using AI to write your stories, it's like asking someone to eat a piece of cake for you. Mm-hmm. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah, I totally
Yeah,
understand.
the experience of writing is meaningful. But I want to go back to something you just said about risk.
Yeah.
I do think that in the writing classroom in particular, there is risk. And the nature of risk is that often it doesn't work out. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times when we talk about risk, we almost feel like it's a test. And if you're brave enough to take a risk, it's no longer risky.
Yep.
That you will be rewarded for it. But that means it's not a risk. And you take the risk and you expose yourself to your peers.
Totally.
And sometimes, it goes really badly.
I think it's about teaching failure. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, I want you to fail. I want you to get messy. I want you to have it not work. That's because otherwise it's not really a risk. If you're not actually risking failure, you're not at risk.
Right. I think, too, part of it is learning, there's that old adage, you know it when you see it. And I think, but writing hits that spot.
Absolutely.
You know a great sentence when you see it, and man, and the question is, are you going to admit that the sentence is terrible and needs to be, the idea of going through and editing, right? Like editing comes in two forms. There's the pass you do before you hand it off to another human, and then there's
Right.
the pass that comes back after you've handed it off to another human. And everyone needs an editor. I don't care what you do, everyone needs an editor. I write a lot of copy that people would never notice, and I still have an editor.
I wish I had an editor for my life.
Yeah,
And also an agent for my life.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I actually think that editing is. I'm truly shocked by people who don't like to be edited, because I like rigorous editing and rigorous copy editing. I mean, I'm totally dyslexic anyway, so I need it. But it's so important. And a couple books ago, a wonderful guy who's now not with us anymore, Robert Jones, was so mad because he wanted to buy my book and he didn't get to buy it. And he goes, "This really sucks because I still know I have to edit it." And I was like, "You do." And I think the weekend before I turned it in, we cut 80 pages, and not like little tiny, and we just sat next to each other like, but that's the best part. I love editing.
I do too. If you have an editor that you trust, it's kind of like you want a shrink that you trust.
Totally.
Because people can give you good advice for the wrong reasons and you can't take it. You can't accept it because you don't like the place from which it's coming. But if you trust your editor, like if you know your editor is just interested in clarity, not that your editor is interested in you becoming weirdly accessible, like you can take it better if you know the person comes from a good place.
We don't spend enough time talking about the intimacy of reading and writing. And I think when you see, part of me is super excited to see other people get excited about books online, right? And sometimes the dialogue and the discourse is great. And sometimes you think, you put that out in the world in print, cool. But the idea that we can get into the back of someone's brain, right? I know you both have had the experience of having audiences say, well, I know exactly who you are because I read one of your books. And that's not always true. I think there are plenty of writers who would tell you, I keep plenty of myself off the page. But it's such an intimate experience picking up a book and stepping into someone else's life.
I had a woman in Baltimore who tried to attack is too strong of a word, but she tried to physically approach me on the stage. She was an older lady. She had a cane. That's the only reason why she couldn't get up on the stage. She was really mad at me and really mad at my book. And she was shaking that cane at me. And she said to me, "You stand by your man." And the moderator said, "Well, ma'am, this is a work of fiction." And that lady pointed that cane at me again. She said, "I read this book and I know what she thinks." And she was absolutely right. I didn't even try to deny it. Because in reading my book, you do know what I think.
Yeah.
Like, you can tell what people think from reading their books. You may not be able to know the minutia of their personal lives, but you know their worldview. Because that is what a novel is. You create a world in it with the rules that conform to how you think the world works. And that lady did not like the way I thought the world worked. But I felt like I would be dishonest as a writer to sit there and tell her, "Oh, no, ma'am, it's just a work of fiction." You know, if she wanted to fight it out, we just have to fight it out. I'm glad she didn't get up there, though.
Yeah, I mean...
Because you cannot be fighting people in public.
No, but also not with a cane.
Right.
That seems ill-considered.
You mean she shouldn't have fought me with a cane?
Yeah.
I agree. I thought
Yes.
I
I would be slightly concerned, especially if that were my event and there was someone coming up to the stage with a cane.
She was so angry at the book.
I have that a lot, but it's funny, I really, really live in the realm mostly of fiction.
Right.
And I often write characters who are profoundly different and see the world differently than I do. And for me, that's the best part. That's the time travel.
Yep.
Because I get to inhabit the body and mind of somebody very unfamiliar and very dissonant. And it's like, it's wild in there. I come out at the end of the day, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, but both of you ground your work. I mean, you're grounded in the suburbs. Westchester feels like, Westchester, the D.C. suburbs, but the American suburb.
Absolutely.
And then Tayari has Atlanta.
Yeah.
And
yes.
I feel like even if you're showing the way you think, or even if you're still grounded in a place that's recognizable, even if parents are smoking crack in their suburban.
And with people who are, and it's interesting, with people who are recognizable, but also importantly, there is the very modern idea of likability. And I talk about this also when teaching and that's, I think, all the more right now. People want to read books where they see themselves in a pleasant way. And I think when you read Crime and Punishment, you don't go, "Oh, wow, I love that guy. I want to hang out." And, Lolita, all of these books that are the characters in the books that stay with us, we don't love them because these are warm people who care about us. These are things that provoke our minds and our sense of how do we define the world we live in? What conversation are we having? And so for me, that's what I'm always writing to. I don't have an answer, but I have a conversation I want to have with the reader.
I feel sometimes like someone called me and said, "Oh, we want you to come and be on a panel to talk about writing unlikable women." And I said, I don't know what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah.
Because I like these people. I think that this question of likability it's a morality issue that people have. They say,
absolutely.
So instead of saying, "I want to read about characters that resonate with me morally," because that makes you sound so judgy and horrible, the people say, "Oh, just unlikable." Because also, who is unlikable? Somebody likes everyone. There's no such thing as an unlikable person. And do not get me started about how the pressure is on women characters to be pleasant. Because it's not even about likable. It's like to be moral and to conform to a fairly conservative understanding of morality.
And of goodness. I mean, yes. And I think about it, too, because I think I'm writing about humans. I'm writing about human behavior. And human behavior has a very broad spectrum.
Yep.
And a character, at best, has a range, right? That's part of the reading, is the evolution of that character and what they come to know about themselves and what you come to know both about the character but also about yourself as a reader. I mean, that's the best part.
But don't you feel sometimes that when your characters behave in a way that some readers may not approve of, they're okay with it if the details of the story punish that person?
Yeah,
totally.
Likability and respectability are too close.
But if you let that character live, they don't. If you don't punish them for that bad behavior, that's why that lady was trying to rush me, because I didn't punish my character.
But literally, my first novel, Jack, which I wrote as homework, I was taking a course in young adult literature, and the idea was there was a new kind of young adult literature where something modern happened. The modern thing would be like someone got pregnant or someone was gay, and these things had to be punished. So if they got pregnant, that was Mr. and Mrs. Bojo Jones, and this is like in the 1970s. And they had to go, the boy had to give up his football scholarship and not go to college, and the girl had to give up everything, and they lived above a garage, and then the baby died. And then the kid who was gay, the dog got run over. There was literally a contemporary moral problem that then had to be punished to show you that this was not a good thing. And so with Jack, I thought I'm writing about bias and this kid whose dad is gay, and I purposely made the dad gay because I wanted the kid to be able to explore what bias was, not from the inside up or from his own experience. But yes, all that to say, punishment is an expectation.
Yeah,
from
I've had people,
moral transgression.
Yeah, I've had people say, but you let her get away with it.
Yes, yeah.
Like, they think that's
a
my
choice
job.
phrasing. That is a deliberate choice in phrasing. But both of you have a similar approach too. I mean, Tayari, you've talked about like liking to live in the ambiguity of the story, right? Like that's the thing that pushes you forward. And A.M., you've talked about, picking the least likely character. Not likable. Okay, we are not talking about likability, but just the least likely character to tell the story. And I love the idea that you're both starting from a place in a really gray area, and then we get really great books out of it as a result.
I mean, I think that moral ambiguity is where the novel comes from. It has to be something that, for me as a writer, I'm willing to wrestle with for several years, so I cannot know what is right. I try to get into the conflict to figure out the different, perspectives on it. Because if I know what's good and what's bad, I tell my students this all the time, that if you have any character that is good and a character that is bad, they can only be very minor characters in your story,
right?
Because they're boring.
Well, it's also like what you were saying before too, in terms of a problem. And I always think like my ideas often come from what I would describe as a nonfiction idea. Like I'm interested in looking at morality in this part of America, or I'm interested in looking at the failure of the political system, or some kind of big idea. And then I think, oh, who's going to come with me on this? And it has to be, Grace Paley used to talk about what is true for the character.
Yeah.
And it's not about what's true for me, but it has to be what is organic and true. And I think about what is their socioeconomic background? What were they doing before this book started? And importantly, and I know I see this in your work too, why is now the moment you need all of us to come pay attention? Because that's huge. And with the students, they often, they start way before they need us to come pay attention. Like 10 pages too early.
Class is part of that, though.
Yes,
you both
absolutely.
write about class.
Yes.
I think I write about class a lot because I'm from Atlanta, so I grew up in basically an all-black environment. So class was the thing that was distinct, that made distinctions among people. And I think that as a black writer, people often expect me to write about a world in which race is what separates people.
Right.
But in the world that I grew up in, it was class. It was which side of an Atlanta Cascade Road do you live, to the north or to the south of it? And that is really the question. So in Atlanta, when people say, "Oh, you're from here?" Yes. "Oh, what high school did you go to?" That's what that question really is.
Yeah. And I think about it in terms of, I would describe it as economics, and how when we talk about fiction, we don't talk about the socioeconomic status of characters, but a family that's all living in a one-bedroom apartment is very different than a family living in a huge suburban house. And the movements of their life are literally different, and the psychological impact of events is hugely different. And I'm always shocked that why do we not study the economics of contemporary literature, or of all literature? It's like an off-the-topic thing, but it's really at the root of everything.
I feel like so many novels, too, all the characters are from the same class.
Right.
I read somewhere that most Americans don't intimately know anyone from another class. But one thing I do think in African American culture, because the Civil Rights Act was in 64, so just imagine a family that had a lot of children in the 50s and 60s. Half their kids were of age before the Civil Rights Act. Half their kids were of age after, which means you have cousins that are divided socioeconomically because half the parents had the opportunity for education and half didn't, and they're first cousins, like my cousins. And so that's one reason why I always think about that.
Can we go back to place for a second? Because I feel like place is a character, and I'm wondering how much of that is the class thing and how much it is the physicality of an American suburb. I mean, everything changes when you're in the burbs.
It's, to me, that the suburbs are really, in a way, like a diorama, and it's one of the things because everything is thrown into relief. Although I mean, in Manhattan too, you know, no one puts their window shades down, so you watch all the TVs at once. You know, it's like going into a PC Richard at night when you just look at an apartment building. But I am fascinated by the way that the suburban life is about display. It is about what people have, the way they choose to protect their boundaries and all of that stuff. That is sort of the part of the classic kind of American cultural evolution. And so I've always been a little bit obsessed by that. I don't love a suburb, truthfully. I mean, I don't live in a suburb.
I'm happy to dip a toe in, but I'm always happy to leave.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, it's just kind of fascinating. And also the amount of space, right? Like, for those of us who are city dwellers, it's kind of fascinating.
All the closets, you mean?
Oh, are you kidding me?
And basements and attics? What are these things?
I have a friend...
Mini storage for miles.
I have stayed in guest rooms that are bigger than my apartment.
Totally, yes.
And I'm just like, okay, I mean, these things happen. But coming back to ideas like shame and doubt and this sort of fake morality that gets ascribed to likable characters and not likable characters. Does writing a book like An American Marriage or May We Be Forgiven, does that change you on the other side? Or are you just showing up and doing the work and entertaining yourself?
Well, I think anything that you're willing to think about for several years is going to change you. I think that writing a book changes you just in the same way that reading a book, you know, can change you. I think the thing that surprised me, that changed me, was the couple years I spent promoting this book. That changed me, and interacting with so many readers who had so many passionate responses.
You were on the road for like 2 years.
I was on the road for 2. If it wasn't for COVID, I'd probably still be on the road.
Yeah, okay. Actually, touring's a whole nother conversation. I'm going to save that for another
I was so, when COVID happened, I had to get off the road. I was so unaccustomed to being in my real life that I was eating on little tiny plates like on the airplane.
Okay, that's just funny. I'm sorry. Cheese and crackers.
I was just trying to ease myself.
Sacred ritual.
Right. I was trying to ease myself back into normal life because I was just, I hadn't been home.
Yeah. But what is home? I mean, home for your characters is impossibly fluid for both of you. I mean, Harry, if it were not for George's fancy house, Harry would be on someone's sofa, possibly. I don't know. Harry's situation was looking a little dire if not for his brother's success.
Yeah, I mean, I think he would have had some small apartment in the Lexington Avenue in the 60s, maybe a studio. He would have downsized, you know. But yes, I think all of that's really interesting. And the question of home, I mean, it's interesting, too, because as a writer, I'm not sure where my home is.
Right.
Because when I'm with these characters for the many years, I am with them in their place. Their home is more real to me than my life. And I come out and I'm like, what's happening? And I'm like, oh, I don't recognize anyone here. I don't know what's happening. Like, I don't sometimes know where I am literally in time and space because I'm most comfortable in fiction.
I lived in New York for about 10 years, and I decided to go home to Atlanta. And I did that because I was in a coffee shop in Brooklyn, and I saw so many, like, major American writers having coffee at the same place at the same time. And I thought, we're all having the same day. We've come from all these different places, but we're having the same day. And at some point, we're going to start writing the same book. And I really wanted to go back to my hometown. I write about Atlanta, and I wanted to write from Atlanta. I do feel that Atlanta is so culturally unique. What I love most about being back home and how I know that I'm at home is that people in Atlanta sometimes mistake me for someone else. Because there are many people such as me in Atlanta. And when I've lived other places, I'm so unique. And it was kind of fun and a novelty to be this different person, be the only one wearing flowers on the panel, etc. But the pleasure of just being just another person on the street, there's something really comforting about that.
Yeah, just to be clear, we
That's
are
so
taping
funny.
in New York.
That's so funny because I have the part where I run into people in New York and they're like, "Hey," and they're like, "Where do you live now?" And everyone thinks I live somewhere else. No,
Really?
yep. Everyone's like, "You live in L.A.?"
Oh,
I'm
seriously?
like, yeah. No one thinks I live here.
I always think of you as so New York.
I know, but no one ever thinks I'm here. And I was like, "No, I'm just right down the street." Like,
Okay, so we're going to play with this idea of community for a second because, I mean, undeniably, there is a whole world of readers. And some, we may break out by genre, we may break out by favorite author. But there is, I would argue there's a giant community of readers out there. And thinking about the two of you as readers, how do you find your next read? What does your TBR look like? Who are you thinking, oh, that's someone I need to check out? I mean, I've been on a slight classics binge because there's a lot of stuff I've been missing. I finally read Middlemarch. This joke will never die. And I'm about to read Wuthering Heights for the first time because I've never been able to finish it. I know, I see Jaws dropping in the audience. I was a history major. I missed some things, and I'm using my job to catch up on the classics, but...
I've been reading a lot of poetry. I really,
Oh, yeah?
and I've been bringing poetry into my class because I think everyone's scared of poetry. They're like, what am I supposed to do with it? Or like, how do you hold it? You know what I mean? They're literally like, I don't know. And I'm interested in language and I'm interested in image, and I find it restorative.
Yeah.
And I like being able to have those small moments. And I read a lot of I don't read a lot of fiction. I read a lot of nonfiction.
Good nonfiction, though, I mean, it moves, it swings.
It does.
Just tell me a story, and I will happily sit there and...
I like science and medicine, and it's just, I know
that.
I'm a total...
No, I totally get that. I totally get that.
I don't.
I read like the New England Journal of Medicine. I'm like, wait, this rash.
Okay, that might be more for... but like,
It's true.
reading, I don't know, When Breath Becomes Air,
Yes,
or...
absolutely, sure.
The Emperor of All Maladies. I mean, there is some science writing where you're like, oh, right, I'm actually, like, I will be smarter by the end of this, but I don't feel like I'm being fed.
Yeah, no, I want the hardcore. I just want, I can't help it. As a kid, I used to go to the National Medical Library and read at night. I'm the only child who borrowed their mother's car to go to the National Medical Library. Excuse me, I've got to look something up. Yeah.
Okay, I love that story.
It's very strange.
That's weird.
I know. I can't help it. It's true, though.
I think I love reading fiction, and I read a lot of things that I kind of literally pick up, a book that's lying around, and I like to carry a book around with me so that I can pretend to be engaged, when I don't want to talk, and then I'll actually become engaged. But I also sometimes like to read the book of the moment.
Yeah.
Like,
No, I get that.
like
Yeah,
you,
I totally
you
get
can't
that.
be walking around today talking about you haven't read James yet. You have to, and that was a book that I did not expect to love.
Right.
I mean, I came toward this book with such, I don't know. I sometimes resent books that are about other books. But next thing I knew, I was all in.
And I don't like Huck Finn, and I still love that book.
Yeah, it's a surprise, and it's creative. You would think that a book about another book, you would already know it, but yet it was still surprising.
That second chapter where James is explaining language to all of the children, he's like, well, this is the language you use in this situation, and here... I mean, living in translation, right? Isn't that every single book is we're all living in translation?
And it also was a little funny.
It was really funny.
It was a little funny. I thought it was great. I thought the self-consciousness about language was super interesting, and it was talking about language in such a way that anyone could get into. Like, you wouldn't have to be like a languagey person to get into it. But if you were a languagey person, you could get even more. But I just loved it, and I was so thrilled to see it win the Pulitzer.
I'm just happy for all of the prizes for all of the books. To be perfectly honest, anything that puts a book in front of someone who might not encounter... I mean, back in the day when we were all sort of coming up through books, like the book review landscape looked really different.
Yes.
And, you could be flipping through a newspaper or a magazine and just stumble onto something. And it would be like, oh, right, I really want to read this person, or who is this, or wait, you have a book? What? And there's a little less of that now, and that sort of serendipitous dipping, because anyone can curate their own feed, right? You can be held hostage by an algorithm and not even know you're doing it. Whereas that sense of discovery is, it's trickier now. Not impossible, but it's trickier. And one of the poets, though, I do want to put on your radar is Aria Aber, who is a finalist for this year's Women's Prize. And
cool.
she won
All right.
the Prairie Schooner Prize for Poetry, and I'm blanking on the title, and I will get it to you. But she's crazy. She's crazy great. And Good Girl is a fantastic debut novel. All of the books on the short list, I'm just calling out this one because the poetry collection was such a revelation to me. And there have been a couple of times recently, like Kaveh Akbar's poetry was new to me, and Sophia Sinclair's poetry was new to me. But all of these people who are doing really interesting work in prose and just have back Ocean Vuong.
Yes.
Some serious poets where I'm like, oh, hi, I will read anything that you
Poets
write.
are actually rocking it, and we're a little like late to the.
They are doing the thing.
Yeah,
Sarah Kay.
I
Hanif Abdur-Rakib, also a poet. I love the idea that language can be manipulated, whether it's epistolary, whether it's prose, whether it's short stories, and now we're going back to short stories should not be turned into novels, and yet we get Harry because you did this. And if I remember correctly, there was an even earlier story that became the story.
Music for Torching.
Okay.
Also, I burned down a house.
Listen, it has to happen
20
sometimes.
pages in, I do something, I kill somebody or burn something down, and then what do I do?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, but short stories shouldn't become novels?
Well, it's interesting because there is a compression to the short story, and I think I think of a novel as like you're taking the train across country and you get on in New York, and overnight you go to Ohio and whatever. And with the short story, you get on and the train's already in Chicago and something's already happened. And so there is a sort of velocity to it, and it's not that sort of unpacking and unfolding of things. So they are different. And also the scale and scope is often different.
Right.
But for me, somehow my stories got longer and my novels still got longer. So I don't know.
Okay.
But philosophically, I think a story is a story and a novel is a novel.
And I think a story should be respected as such. I hate the way that
It's
story writers are being pressured to write novels. Like a short story is not, the minor leagues
It's
for
not
novels.
less than.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really important point. It is not the minor leagues. It's not practice. It is a different art form.
Yes, absolutely.
I also do not think that books grow up, graduate, and become movies.
Well, that is the thing. A book, yes, and people always want to know what's going to happen to your book next. And I thought, it's a book.
Yeah, it is what it is. Yeah, but people always like, is it going to be a movie?
Is that not good enough? Right? Yes. I know, that's the weird thing. Is it going to be a movie? And then they also ask, what else are you doing? It's like, well, I'm juggling on the side. That's a phenomenon of book tour. Is you're out there with a new book, and everyone else wants to know, what other jobs do you have? It's like, well, I'm working for the sanitation department at 3 a.m., and then
What I love most as a bookseller, though, is that this idea that just because a book is new now or old or whatever, it's new to someone somewhere. I am staring at my dotage, and Wuthering Heights is going to be new to me, and I've tried it more than once.
I will say, I had a weird experience. So, like 30 years ago, I wrote the story about a boy dating a Barbie doll, which was so radical then that it actually couldn't be published because people were afraid of being sued by Mattel. And there is now, I realize, a whole generation of people who don't know that story. And so when the Barbie movie came out, they're like, whoa. And that's a weird moment where you just think, I just thought I was getting started with my writing still. I didn't know 30 years had passed.
I had an idea for a reading series. Want to hear my idea?
Yes, please.
Where, those of us who have a few miles on our odometer, that we would be invited to come and read from our debuts. Like, wouldn't that be fun, I think?
Yes.
I am taking notes.
I think it'd be a great...
As she bats her eyes at me, I am taking notes.
I think it'd be great. I would love to hear people read from... And it would be fun to do it, because, I haven't read from my debut in 10, 15 years, just to do it again. I would love it.
Well, even just the evolution. I think that's the thing that's also cool. Like, I look back and I think, wow, I didn't, there's 13 books, and yet I do see thematic and character and all kinds of things that are absolutely sort of signature items that built over time, and I think, that's kind of cool. I didn't know that.
It's always fun when I get to sit down with a writer's body of work and go, oh, yeah. Because you're not necessarily, there's stuff that I read immediately with you, and then there's stuff that I read later, and There's stuff that I've read immediately with Tayari, but gone back to reread. I mean, we all bring ourselves to whatever we read, right? Like, and wherever you are in that moment, it's never the same. I'm always
That's
kind
the
of
coolest
amazed,
thing always
right?
to me is reading. I used to do this weird thing. I just used to read the same books over and over and over again. But it's amazing how different a book is at different points in your life. And you sort of remember it one way and then you go back to it and you're like, oh, no idea.
I used to read
Yeah.
Cheever really aggressively and often and reread. I used to be able to recite the last sort of couple paragraphs of Wapshaw,
Wow.
which is Leander's letter to his sons. If you've ever read Wapshaw, you could actually just cheat and go read those 2 paragraphs. And for the life of me, I can't do it anymore. But I just remember thinking, oh, right, he gets it. Like, he just explained all of the adults in my orbit to me in these 2 paragraphs. And I was like, oh, I finally have a handbook. Now I understand. So the idea that a book can do that.
I used to read Toni Morrison again and again, and every time it was entirely different, and I kept thinking, "There's something wrong with me," because like, it just was a totally different story, a totally different book, because I would notice different characters, different language, different evolution, and it was always just amazing. And I was like, "This is like magical," and you know.
And also, as you get older, you put your attention to different
Exactly.
Yeah,
characters.
without
Exactly.
a doubt.
Yes.
Without a doubt.
And if the novelist is like Morrison and develops everybody,
Exactly.
even the minor characters, you can
Exactly.
better understand your life. Like, I feel like literature helps me understand my life. And that, because you get to see, like in your real life, you don't really get into the minds of all the people around you.
Right.
But the way novels are set up, you get to really understand what a dynamic is.
That's yes, and the tension and the interrelationships between people that the first 10 times you read, you're like, oh, I didn't know that, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, that's so specific, and she's so on the mark, and then I didn't notice that when I was 10 years younger because it wasn't part of my life in that way, in some sense.
It's also really weird when you're paging through an old edition of something and you find your own note and you're like, occasionally I judge my younger self, let's put it that way, but you find these notes and you're like, oh, sweetie, that's so cute. That is okay. I'm assuming you're both working on new books?
One is working on me.
Wait, I thought you figured out what you had to do.
But I have to do it.
Oh, okay, well.
I realized I killed the wrong character. So I have to raise the dead and commit a murder.
Okay.
But I think it's that my thinking was, okay, this person was the person I thought was most likely not to make it. I mean, I felt like he was living on borrowed time since page 75. It's by the grace of God that he was alive on page 300. However, my editor made a very good observation that when you got to that, you felt like, that's so unfortunate. I hate that happened. But you don't go 300 pages to say, that's so unfortunate. At page 300, you want to just be like, no. So you have to kill. If someone's going to die, it has to be someone closer to the reader's heart. And someone closer to the reader's heart is also someone closer to my heart.
I understand. All right, listen, I just have to sit here patiently until it's done and I can see
Almost
pages,
done.
so.
I'm going to be done by the 4th of July.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm almost there. Because, not to just get in the weeds, but since it happens so close to the end.
Yeah.
Because usually when you revise a novel, it's like, remember that movie, Michael J. Fox, when you go back in the time machine?
Yes.
Like, if you go back in
Back
the
to the
time
Future.
machine
Yeah.
and you drop a pack of gum,
Yes.
you will change the course of history.
Yes, exactly.
And that's the same when you start revising. You start changing the course of the whole novel, and you have to follow that change all the way through.
Right.
And
That's
I am
it.
chapterizing,
I
like
know
you
that
said.
is no,
It's
but
so
that's
hard.
I know chapterizing is
Chapterizing,
yes.
oh my God, yes.
Right, and each chapter, it's not the same as a short story, but it has a shape, and it
Beginning,
has
middle, and end.
It has it really does, and it has a beginning and an end, and it also has a relationship to what came before and what comes after, and you're looking at length and shape and character and all that stuff. Yeah,
And if it's not done well, you know it.
Yep.
But you don't necessarily have the words to describe what's wrong and how it's gone off the rails.
Exactly.
But yeah, if the chapterizing is not done well, it'll
Yep.
yank you right out of the
Yep.
story.
Okay, let's talk about how great the Women's Prize is, because you're upsetting me.
Oh, well, we can talk about how great the
I think we
Women's
should
Prize
talk about the Women's Prize, actually. I think it's incredibly essential.
Do you remember where you were when you got the news?
You're at the thing. You're
Right,
at
I'm
the.
like, trick
You're at
question.
the reception.
You're at the event.
Yes,
oh,
you're there. You're
you
all,
spring it on them.
Yes.
You're all gussied
Oh.
up. They've given everyone flowers. Everyone's holding
That's
flowers.
delightful.
And then they have someone come and read, and they say things like, all the books were so worthy. So that's everyone. Everyone's like, okay, I feel
Yeah.
worthy. And then they say something, then they give some hint like, and this is a story that's about two people. And I was like, my book's about two people. There's two people. And they keep saying things that are deeply connected. I'm like, my people are deeply connected. They're torn apart. Mine are definitely torn apart. Like you keep going until they finally give one detail that then that is your
It's
book.
yours.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's very exciting in that way. But the best thing about the Women's Prize, for me at least, was when I landed in the UK for the Women's Prize ceremony, my Google alert went off, and it was some wager site
Wow.
that let me know that I was the second least likely person to win. I was like, oh, that's not nice.
Yeah, that British betting stuff is weird.
They'll bet on anything.
Yeah, they will.
So I came in as an underdog, but that's also a space that I enjoy inhabiting because I feel like I know myself in that space.
Right.
And so I did all these events all week long, and we also visited a prison there because whenever I travel abroad, I like to go and do a book event for people who are incarcerated, and it was a really good experience to do that and to meet those guys. But the Women's Prize, like for someone like me, it gave me access to the entire English reading world,
Yeah.
the English speaking world, and that it changed my readership completely.
Yeah.
And that was just such a gift.
Yeah.
I would say for me, there's so many things, but one of them is that I think of myself as a very American writer, for better or worse. And that is one of the things I'm doing. And in this country, people can't often decide, are you making fun of us? Or are you like, what is your relationship to us? Or,
Right.
how are we supposed to handle that? And in other countries, that's not the case. And so the readers are very different. And it means a lot to me to be an American writer in other countries and to be sort of reflecting whatever view that is. So that's huge. And then with this book in particular, this is about two messed up brothers. So I really did not think that there was any way it was going to win the Women's Prize. And so that also to me was for lack of a better word, higher praise than I was sort of expecting, because I thought, wow, they really get the book at all the levels that it's written. And importantly, one of my teachers, Angela Carter, was one of the people who founded the Women's Prize, and she was so special and so unusual. And when I was a younger writer, I was really not that interested in women's literature, and I didn't like the categorization. I didn't like being described as a woman writer. I thought, no one says male writer Philip Roth today did whatever, but it's always like woman writer whatever. And so it still bothers me, but I think all the more as I've gotten older, I'm like, women have to get out there and really support the work of other women writers. And I don't think I'm a traditional woman writer, woman writer, whatever that is. Because I'm writing about a very broad range of characters, and often male characters dominate, but that all the more it meant an enormous amount to me.
And see, I had the opposite experience in that I was never considered a woman writer. I've always been considered a Black writer. I've not been considered a Southern writer, all the things that I am.
Right.
And so I was very pleased to be included in this, this international competition for women writers.
I mean, again, I think it comes back to the idea of community. It comes back to finding the truth of your own life in the detail of someone else's, right? Like whatever we can do to bring more people into the conversation, I think we all benefit. And this is, I find a lot of things that I've been reading over the years on this prize list, whether it's part of the long list, part of the short list, whether it's the winners, I just get really excited. And also, I may find a connection to another writer because of someone who's nominated or someone I've read, and I'm like, oh, well, maybe I should know who you are, too. I mean, that that larger conversation. I mean, I love the idea that you're both positioned overseas as well. I mean, it doesn't always happen on the scale that we would like to see.
But importantly, too, I mean, when we look at the number of books by women reviewed, the numbers are lower. So that nomination list means an enormous amount. That long list means an enormous amount because it is bringing attention to all those writers who might not have been reviewed, who might not have been seen in some ways.
Right. And the rigor of that list always. What I always love about the Women's Prize list is that there'll be big books that you've heard a lot about, and also books that you may not have heard of. But the way you always have a sense that these are the best books of this year. Like every single time, like I feel like I never go wrong reading the books on the Women's Prize
I agree.
list.
When I was running the Discover Great New Writers program for B&N years ago, it was constantly, we would be like, oh, right, you got tapped, we remember that. Oh, you're okay. I mean, it was definitely a barometer that we paid attention to. And sometimes there were really small print runs in small houses picking up these titles, but, you know, we were always excited to see them.
Yeah.
Okay, on that note, since we're all really excited, because the Women's Prize is a very, very cool thing, we should probably have you sign some books. So this is where I'm going to say thank you all for joining us.
Thank you for being here.
This is poured over. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.